Hey guys, welcome back to another Patreon exclusive video. I am really excited for this particular video because I want to talk about the differences between learning about women and the theory and the practice of being friends with women, of dating women, experience. And this topic was inspired by a comment that was left from one of the members of our community here on a video I did about 5 videos ago, the one about whether or not learning about women was going to demystify them and reduce our pleasure. And I just thought that what this particular commenter had written was so insightful that it merited a longer discussion and explanation for me. But just to start things off, I just want to read out for you an exact quote of what it is that he wrote because I found it really, really interesting. One problem that I know I am facing currently from a male perspective is an abundance of theoretical knowledge and a lack of practical experience. Essentially, boys have to be patient and develop themselves to extreme lengths in order to obtain honest, practical experience inside a healthy relationship. Therefore, we are learning way more theory before being able to practice it, especially in this age of increasing isolation, the pandemic, social media, tech influence, etc. Trying to see it from the other side, it seems to me like women might have the opposite problem of having very little preparation or understanding before being thrust into a time-sensitive practical exam. Only later can they dedicate time to learning the opposite sex on perhaps a more intellectual level. I just think it's so spot on, and it's why I think it's quite rare. I do have female audience members on the YouTube channel, and of course here on Patreon. You know their names by now. They're quite active in the comment section, which I hugely appreciate. But they do tend to be women who have had some experience already in relationships, and it fits with what he said. They have seen what's out there with regards to dating and male female dynamics, and now they're thinking about the theory of it, and they bring a lot of really interesting insights to it. I'm very, very, very grateful for it. But what he says, I think, is absolutely true. Young women are thrust into, what does he call it, a time sensitive practical exam, but they're thrust into the dating world, and the sexual marketplace really, really early because they're in huge demand. Once a girl leaves high school and she's of dating age, basically all the guys age 20, 30, sometimes even 40, they're all trying to date these girls. And she's like, wow, look at all of these opportunities. Yes, that seems fun. And yes, that seems exciting. She's the top of her world because she's at her sexual market peak. She's at her most beautiful, her most fertile. So all the guys are interested in her. And so she just goes for the experience. But she doesn't really have the time to really stop and consider and think about all this theory. I mean, she could take that time, but she's too busy sort of enjoying herself. And inevitably what happens is that she makes her mistakes in the real world. She makes experiential mistakes rather than cognitive, theoretical mistakes. And I think that it's just another reason why that sort of extreme manosphere perspective of once a woman turns 30, she no longer wants, one night stands with Chad. She wants to settle for some chump loser who she never would have slept with 10 years ago, but now she's settling for him. It's just such a cynical perspective. I'm not saying that that doesn't happen, sometimes, probably more than even I realize, but it is also possible that women have genuinely made mistakes in their dating choices in their early 20s because they never took the time to consider the theory. They just were taking opportunities, and they've genuinely reflected upon those guys. That seemed fun, but that sucked, and I genuinely want something different. And that's why, as I'm turning 30 and looking to have children, I have made a conscious choice to change my priorities. It's not necessarily because I've hit the wall and I'm losing my looks and I can't get, the same guys that I wanted to when I was 18. I've actually changed the kind of person that I'm looking for. That's entirely reasonable. And so I think that it's worth keeping that in mind as men, that we potentially, dare I say, you might need to be a little bit more nuanced when you're judging women for their past dating mistakes, because you potentially would have made just as many dating mistakes if you were in their position of being so highly in demand and thrust into this time-sensitive practical exam, all this dating experience, before you'd really had that time to develop the theory. Like, I can only imagine what most men would do if they had the kind of sexual abundant opportunities that young women do. Like, really, let's be honest, would you be on the internet, reading books about psychology, listening to podcasts, watching my videos, trying to understand the opposite gender? Probably not. If you had 100 hot girls, beating down your door, wanting to take you out, you probably just fuck. Like, really, you probably wouldn't even have relationships. If guys had that kind of abundance, if men found themselves with that female opportunity, they'd probably just have like a whole bunch of sex. And they'd get into toxic relationships. They'd fall for lying, narcissistic, abusive women. They'd make all kinds of mistakes. And in a sense, men are sometimes protected from making too many dating and relationship mistakes simply because of the lack of opportunity, right? They don't have the abundance of options that women do, and so there's fewer opportunities to make those mistakes. And so it's quite logical what actually does tend to happen. We say, well, why are there so many men online on YouTube trying to learn about women, trying to understand all this stuff, reading philosophy, reading politics, reading psychology, reading about dating and all that stuff? Well, largely, I think like the dating theory, why men get so into it is because they're not where they actually want to be in their dating life. Maybe they're just not dating girls as pretty or as high quality as they want, or they're in relationships, but they're always struggling to make themselves understood or to find satisfaction in those relationships. And men are pretty proactive, as a general rule. I know it's a generalization, but when there is a problem, men are like proactive, like, let's fix this. What is the solution? And so they start reading the theory. So what he says, I think, is absolutely correct. You tend to find men in their 20s have put in a lot more hours into the theory than they have into the practice. But I don't necessarily think that that is a biologically constructed, like deterministic, like it has to be this way. I do think that that is a response to the market forces of, with nothing else really left to do, because we don't have the kind of abundance, options of dating that women do, men turn to theory so that they can try and create that kind of experience in their reality. But this leads us to the question, with so much theory, is there potentially some downsides? Like, is there a danger in spending too much time learning about women rather than actually just sort of dating women? And I think that there is actually too much theory can be a bad thing. And I'm going to go through those issues now. This whole issue, it reminds me of a debate that used to occur, 12 years ago or 13 years ago. I don't like thinking about that. It makes me feel really old. But back when I was in my early 20s and I was doing like the pickup artist stuff, and we would practice social skills, we'd practice, hitting on women. And the industry was still pretty young, I suppose, back then. But already you could start to see the divide in that there were those guys who were really in it for the field experience. They really wanted to practice it. Like, let's go out every single night. I'm going to approach 20 women today, 20 women tomorrow. And they just wanted to get as much experience as possible. And then there were guys who didn't really want to do the work in terms of actually getting out there and talking to women. They just wanted to learn all of the theory. They tell themselves kind of like, once I have read 100 hours of books and seen 100 hours of in-field video footage showing me, techniques and how to approach women, then I'll feel like I've mastered it all theoretically, and then I'll move it into the real world. And as someone who's a little bit more action-oriented, although I certainly loved the theory, we would kind of look down upon like the theory heads who could talk endlessly about like the game and women, whatever, but nearly had no results to back it up. They're still basically as terrified as ever. In fact, all of that theory that they've read has maybe put so much pressure on them that they're almost afraid to make mistakes. They wouldn't try because they know cognitively how perfect it's meant to look, how it's meant to go, whereas obviously, as anybody will tell you who's done this, cold approach is a total shit show. Like, it is. You might get some dates, you might get some numbers, but you're basically going to fudge your way through in a really awkward, improvising way. You're going to get it right sometimes, but it's going to be awkward and messy, and you need to be okay with failing. You need to have not too fragile an ego to actually cope with a whole bunch of rejection, and that's just, it comes part and parcel with the territory. And so this comes a little bit the same here. Like, it's not just with pickup, but it comes with dating and relationships. Guys who understand all that theory, it could potentially be that they're putting so much pressure on themselves to get it right that they're afraid to get in there and actually make mistakes. And that is a huge problem. Too much theory in that sense is prohibitive to the actual experience of having a relationship. So anytime that a guy is feeling lonely, feeling like he wants more from his dating life, wants more from his relationships, there is a correct course of action to be taken. And that is proactive, real-world behaviors that are going to bring about the outcome that you want. A beautiful, high-quality girlfriend. That's generally what guys want. But not all action is created equal. So, for example, if you spend 10 hours 1 week doing the theory and you learn about women, you're reading the books, you're watching the YouTube videos, you're listening to the podcasts, well, okay, that's good. That's your theory week. If you spend 10 hours the next week just on theory, there's going to be a massive amount of diminishing returns because that information should already be fresh in your mind. You might need a constant little jolts of a reminder of things like that. But largely, you've got enough theory to work with. Where's the practice? Where's it to back it up? And the problem is that it gives you a false sense of progress, right? Like, if you feel that feeling of loneliness, you're like, okay, well, I need to be moving in the direction of getting a relationship. I know, I'll learn some more theory. And you get into that. And it's like, okay, you get that feeling of, now I'm more informed. I'm going to be more equipped to be able to handle myself in social situations and when I'm on a date and when I'm in a relationship so that I've got better tools at my disposal, but you're not creating as many opportunities. So you can see, obviously, the best thing to do is a bit of this and a bit of that. And doing too much of one or the other is likely to bite you in the butt. Like if you're doing too much experience, you're only dating women, you're never reflecting on your actions or learning about them, you're going to make a whole bunch of mistakes, which a little bit of theory might have helped you out. But if it's all just theory, then you become a keyboard jockey and there's no experience in the real world actually backing that up. And that's a huge problem. And so when you do feel lonely, the correct thing to do is to go out and to socialize, to make some new friends, go and spend some time with the women that you know, even do cold approach, as weird as that can be. Those skills are going to be important. That's going to be better for you towards moving you towards your goal than just learning endless theory. So definitely experience is really, really important. The other thing to realize here is that the two are not separate. They're very, very intimately linked in that what experiences that you have are going to inform your understanding of the theory. This can be quite a complicated point, so stick with me here because this one's really, really important. Essentially, your ability to adequately understand the theory is going to be highly dependent upon what experiences you have had, right? So if I tell you all about the country of France, and purely theoretical, and I'm just using words, if you've never been to Europe before, you have no idea what the people sound like, what they look like, what the trees and geography look like, you're not really going to form an accurate picture of like what I'm talking about. But if you've traveled extensively through France and I'm telling you additional details, you're going to be able to make a lot more sense of that new information. So to bring it back to dating and relationships, if I'm telling you a whole bunch of theory about female psychology, about how they operate, how they think, what they're looking for in a man, if you already have extensive experience with women, you're going to be able to make a lot better sense of that theory as plugging in the few gaps of knowledge that you have than if you had no experience whatsoever. And this is something that it wasn't until writing the script for this video that I actually realized it's something I'm incredibly proud of, which I would say is the general quality of my audience. And I don't think it's a coincidence. And I'm not saying every single person who watches my videos is perfect. I've read the YouTube comment section. There are some trolls, there are some incels. I'm not going to deny that. But largely, when I've done private consultations and when I've spoken to people and when I've read the comments here on Patreon, you tend to find either people who are struggling to get a relationship, but they have a huge amount of like compassion and empathy towards human beings and a great understanding of human psychology, or it's guys who have had relationships and they're looking to optimize them or to find like maybe a better partner. But these are not completely hopeless, autistic, never socialized with anybody, incel kind of guys. And I think that the reason why that is because the theory that I talk about, and yes, I'm a theory person, I give out lots of theory, but it's all based on experience. It's based on the things that I have witnessed in my personal life and in the personal life of my friends. And I also talk to people, I talk to everybody about relationships, so I'm constantly getting real information. Everything that people sometimes ask me, like, what book should I read to get inside your mind to understand how you think? And, I'll tell them sort of abstract, like I know some psychology books, a book on codependence, a book on abusive relationships, a bit of Ayn Rand. And that's, of course, all of that's been really helpful to inform me. But largely, my beliefs, my thoughts, my opinions, it's not based on other theories that I've read. It's based upon my own observations in the real world. But I believe this is why my content resonates with those men who have experience, who've been maybe moderately successful with women or are likely to be in the future because they're those kinds of individuals, nuanced, intelligent, because they've seen things in the real world. They've taken note of it, but perhaps they haven't dedicated the same amount of time or prioritized it the way I have. But largely, it's not so much like a comment that I'll hear quite frequently is not like, you have taught me something new. It's like, you've told me something that I already knew, right? Like you've put words to something that I did know, but I couldn't have articulated it yet. And to me, that's a much bigger compliment, because it's not just throwing out propaganda or anything and just like taking a blank page and then writing to it. It's more like taking a fully formed picture, but then giving it the correct label. And I think that there's a deeper skill in that. And I think it's one of the reasons why I have generated a lot of trust in my audience. I don't mean to toot my own horn too much here. I'm just trying to make a larger point. But I think largely I do have a lot of credibility with those people who really get where I'm coming from, not because of necessarily like there's this perfect consistency with everything I say. It's that largely the things that I say resonate with their own experiences. And so it's less that they trust me, it's that they trust themselves. They trust what they have perceived. And it tends to be that if I say 10 things and 9 of them have completely resonated with your experience, that 10th thing that hasn't resonated with your experience, because of the credibility that I have built up, you're more likely to listen to it and go like, all right, well, that's not what I've seen, but I'll remain open to it. And maybe in 2-3 months or even a couple of years, you'll be like, holy shit, he said that way back then and he was absolutely right. I just hadn't gotten to that point of realization yet. And so I think that having theory without experience is actually dangerous. It leads you open to being conned, right? Like there's cult leaders and scam artists and frauds or whatever who tell you any crazy bullshit. And if it's not based on reality and they're not drawing from your own experiences to lend them credibility, then they can lead you in all kinds of crazy directions, which is why I think that the guys who talk just such bullshit, like utter nonsense on YouTube, just, maybe trashing women to an extreme degree or saying this seduction technique is 100% guaranteed to work, when real world experience obviously shows you that nothing works like that. There is going to be an audience of men who will fall for that because they're not relying on their own personal experiences to judge whether or not information is accurate or not. And so as long as there's an internal consistency from the speaker, people will fall for it. So the less experience you have, like real practical experience with women, the more likely you are to fall for theory that is not based on reality. And what tends to happen is that the theory gets crazier and more extreme based on how far you go from experiences, right? So what are the most base kind of instincts that human beings have? Was the desire for sex, and there's the desire for an enemy, like hatred, fear, anger, and things like that. And that's what you see in like real theory jockey kind of forums that don't refer at all to experiences. It's like it's all just about sex, like I'm going to teach you everything you need to know to just get laid, and that's what the focus becomes. Or it's like I'm going to justify why you feel so angry towards women, I'm going to feed on that hate and get you all emotional, and that's an entirely predictable consequence of not having reference to experience. Because when you spend enough time with women, you realize how weird it is to think of them in a purely sexual way. They're all thinking, feeling individuals. They're all autonomous. They all have their own perspective. And it's only when there's an absence of women in your real life and you're only seeing them in music videos and porn or whatever like that, can you sexualize an entire gender and completely disregard their sovereignty as individuals. And it also makes it easier to hate somebody, this goes true not just for men and women, but it's like racism and homosexuality. Anytime that there's like an irrational hatred of another individual because of the group that they depend on, it's because you don't spend time with individuals. Once you do spend time with individuals that happen to belong to that group, you notice all the things that you share in common, and the hatred and the otherness and the enemy kind of programming, it begins to fall away. And that's entirely predictable. So look, that's everything I've got to say for now about this, but if you have your own comments on it, please let me know. But just as a basic sort of summary, I think that theory, of course, is extremely important. My whole livelihood at this point is just talking about theory, but do you see, it relies on you having experience in order to be able to tell what's the good theory, like authentic and reality-based, and what's not good theory. I hope that makes sense. I want to thank you guys for your ongoing support here on Patreon. I really appreciate you watching all the way to the end of the video. I will catch you in the next one.